Hey MBA hopefuls, we are live with air with MBA Waves talking all things business and education. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, which helps us continue to create all this free content. Today, on episode 151, we're bringing the focus on how sustainability is core to business, how to prepare for a post MBA career in sustainability, and of course, leveraging your MBA programs to make a difference. I'm your host today, Krithika Srinivasan, joined by my co hosts, Eric and Bara. How are you all doing?
Great.
Great, good to
And
see
we
you.
have Great to see you. Yeah, and we have two special guests today, our friends and colleagues, Katherine Baird, who's the Director of Office and of Sustainability and Climate Change at Berkeley Haas, and Anne Huang, who's a sustainability consultant and an INSEAD alumna. A big warm welcome to you all. How are you all doing?
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Good to see you again, Kat. You were with us in December, I think, on a Berkeley episode, was it?
Yeah, last year, I think.
Yeah. And Anne, first time meeting you.
Yeah, and it's a great pleasure to have you both. And we were just discussing this before the episode started about how warm it is and how much warmer it is. Almost by close to around 12 plus degree Fahrenheit, right? Is that right? Right where you are at the moment, Catherine?
Yes, here in Berkeley, California, we've been having a huge heat wave the last week. So it's been about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is unusual here so close to the ocean in the Bay Area. So definitely feeling the heat this week.
Yeah, and that's why we are on this hot topic of careers and sustainability. So, starting this with probably Catherine first, how have corporate priorities around sustainability evolved in recent years? And what are some of the key changes that is driving business today?
Yeah, so that's a big question, but I think what we're seeing with corporations is very similar actually to what we're seeing in business schools, which is a real acknowledgement by business leadership that sustainability is a core strategic priority, and that understanding issues around climate change, biodiversity, deforestation, that these have very real and tangible impacts on everything from supply chains and production to the returns on investments that investors are making at all different scales. And so I think rather than maybe seeing sustainability as it was in the past, as a sort of siloed issue, perhaps put, to one side, or as I like to say sometimes, in the basement with the corporate social responsibility CSR department, we're now really seeing it front and center. It's being talked about in boardrooms across the world at the highest levels. And so I think we're seeing that mirrored in business schools as well. At least that's what I hope. And that's one of the things that I work on, is to really make sure that here at UC Berkeley Haas, we are making sure that all of our students, all of our undergrads and also our MBA students, graduate what we call climate literate. So we want to make sure that no matter what industry you go to, what function you work in, that you really have a clear understanding of how climate change and sustainability are going to impact your field and your work, and that you can lead in that in this new environment.
I like that term, climate literate. I feel like it should just be a universal language that everyone needs to speak at this point.
And I don't even think we can ignore it, right? Like it's not an afterthought. Like there's no way that we can avoid what's happening. I mean, we have two huge catastrophes, one on the way in the United States right now, and one that we just had, right? So they might be in the basement, but they might be coming up on the other floors too. Like the elevator's going up.
So what Bara's talking about is Hurricane Helene that hit the southeast of the U.S. and like in an unimaginable way. Like it's like a 1 in 1,000 year kind of flood. Like in places like Asheville in the western part of North Carolina, in the mountains, they got flooded. And the town is a small city, but it's like off the map at this point. And there is another.
Right. We've been hearing a lot about Asheville, but there's dozens of towns that were affected as well. So Catherine, since you're in the hot seat right now, if you can tell us a little bit about what led you to this amazing career that you've had in sustainability, to sort of talk about your trajectory and also your experience in the Columbia Climate School.
Yeah, so I my career trajectory has really been mostly about climate. I think I have come to business school actually in a slightly sort of roundabout way. I was very passionate about climate action and making sure that throughout my early career, really being an advocate and a campaigner to engage more people around issues of climate change. And so, you know, one of the real questions is when you have an issue this big that feels really overwhelming, right? We often talk about, you know, what can I do as an individual on an issue that affects the whole world? I think what I've always been really interested in is how do you help people to feel really like they can make a difference, you know, like that this is an issue that they can tackle however they want to and however makes sense for them. And so coming to Haas and coming to UC Berkeley has been an extension of that, right? It's been like, how do people who are in an MBA program who have enormous opportunities to be leaders in business and to really shape the future of our economy and of different industries, how can those people really feel like tackling this climate crisis, like addressing issues of sustainability is something that I guess not only that they can do, but also that they want to take on and are excited and see as an opportunity, not just as this sort of overwhelming challenge. And I think that's been really interesting because it's been mirrored at, you know, business schools and universities across the country and across the world. And one of the things that's been really exciting has been to see how in the last 10 years, schools have really stepped up to tackle those issues. And so I can talk at length, and I'm happy to, about all the amazing things that we've done here at UC Berkeley Haas. But I think, you know, you mentioned the Columbia Climate School. I took a short course with them last year around how do you communicate around climate, because this is something that I'm, you know, really interested in, is like, how do we take this kind of complex scientific topic at times and turn it into something that feels accessible to people. But, you know, when we look at schools across the United States, when we look at MBA programs across the world, we're really seeing schools be innovative in terms of the types of programs that they're offering. I mean, I often look to what people are doing at schools like at INSEAD and Europe, because they are really leading the way, I would say, a lot of times in terms of innovative climate curriculum, in terms of tackling a lot of these issues in their education system. So it feels like a moment that has a lot of momentum around it, no matter where people decide to do their MBA program.
I kind of want to dive in, but I don't know that we're going to have time. If we have time at the end, I'd love to dive in and learn a little bit about what are some of the things, because when you started, it was probably a nascent field in the business schools, right? And now you've got a whole cadre of business schools that are like, this is important, we can't ignore it, we've got to do this. And so the innovation is probably just percolating incredibly now, even though I would imagine in the 70s there was probably some talk, right, about the environment. It's just a whole new field almost. I want to get Anne into the conversation here also. You've got an incredible experience with sustainability, first with ESG and now advising for VCs. How did you choose these paths, and how did your MBA actually contribute to shaping your role in this field?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I would say my sustainability journey has definitely been a really winding one, and definitely not very straightforward, because my approach to sustainability at the very beginning was through urban planning. So that's why I did urban planning undergraduate in the US, and that was I started almost 20 years ago, and I quickly got interested in corporate social responsibility. But this is 2008. I mean, financial crisis, and it's not really a field that kind of people talk about that much. So, I worked for a few years, not necessarily linked to sustainability, but then went back to school. So I went to get my master's in environmental science and policy at Columbia SIPA. So this is before that Columbia had a climate school. So afterwards, I feel like, I was been more like legitimize myself as being in the sustainable space. So I worked at a company that was doing sustainability rating. And then I felt like because I was looking for a change, and MBA is that kind of, where people want to go pivot into another career path or a different sector. That's kind of what they do, which I end up doing. And yeah, and I think the MBA just, really broadened a bit of my horizon, my network, or the kind of curriculum that you're taking at school. But I would definitely say things have probably changed a lot faster in the past 5 years since I graduated, because that's when INSEAD, they have the Hoffman Institute that was created about 6 years ago now. And it's really trying to get a lot of the sustainability curriculums into the standard MBA curriculum. It's not just electives. Of course, there are more and more electives too. And then you have also this like network of business school also coming together to say, look, this is a business problem also to some extent. Of course, you always have to get different players in different sectors, the government, the civic society, all can come work together. So I do think coming from a business school, that's where you do have to work with a lot of different stakeholders, and we're quite in a unique position where we could be doing that.
And we have a question that just came in from our colleague and friend Thomas Kalandrinis in Greece. And we know him through this organization called AGAC. It's the Association for Graduate Admissions Consultants. All of us are connected to this organization. So Thomas asks, actually, yes, for Kat, excuse me, I just saw that. Are you saying that environmental issues are finally hitting the bottom line of corporations?
I mean, absolutely, right? We're seeing this happening across industries, across the world. I think really the place that you can see this transformation most is in the investment industry, right? When investors are really making significant investment decisions based on climate risk factors. And what we're seeing is, we've had some incredible work over the last few years. SASB did a lot of work for a number of years on mapping climate risk for different investors, different industries, different companies. And now we're seeing that in ratings agencies, in all different kinds of institutions and companies that have stepped up to really say and try and evaluate how environmental issues are hitting the bottom line of corporations. And I think that's the place that we're still working through. And honestly, as an MBA, I think that's one of the interesting areas that MBAs can really dive into at the moment is, how do we actually quantify some of these environmental issues? And how do we predict how they're going to hit the bottom lines of companies so that they aren't unexpected, so that they don't create massive supply chain shocks or, investment downturns? And so, yes, I think they are. And I think as an industry, we're still figuring out what exactly does that mean and how do we build those into corporate strategic planning going forward.
Can I just add from kind of my point of view, working as a service provider, but also, talking to a lot of these clients. And as Kat was saying, like, I think we're still figuring out how do we quantify a lot of these risks. So I think there's a lot of noise. And of course, we have seen this ESG boom. And then I would say last year, this year, there's a bit of a kind of, people aren't really sure what they're going to do, kind of how to move forward. So there's a lot of kind of ESG backlashing, you can call it, or ESG like green hushing. So I think the market is still trying to figure out how to quantify it in a way. And I feel like there's a lot of rating agencies, as you mentioned, a lot of investments, but we need to standardize the way people are reporting, and maybe the rating agencies, there's some regulations coming in, regulating the ESG rating agencies. We'll have to see how that kind of pans out, because I do feel, talking to industry players, there is a frustration actually of, investing in money, but not necessarily seeing the alpha that was promised. And also, I think that lack of standardization, it's problematic. So that's why Kat mentioned the ISSB is, trying to lay a kind of fair playing ground. In the EU, of course, there are a lot of efforts within the European Union, have some reporting standards, some green sustainable finance labeling schemes not coming up, already in place, although they're trying to improve some of them. So I think it is a interesting space to see how it evolves afterwards.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And you mentioned the European Union and regulation, and I think what's really interesting here, especially for our MBA audience or MBA hopeful audience, is the interplay between corporate, big business and governments, like how the two put together. And the third piece of the puzzle is average citizens and how we all play a role. I think so many people feel like, I'm just one person. How do I have an impact if everyone else is, I don't know, littering or not recycling or burning a lot of gas? And my first thought is like, read Candle on the Sun. It's like a children's book that teaches you how to like have an identity in the mass of 8 billion people. But these past weeks I've been traveling a bit in Europe for various MBA events, and people that I've met working at like ski stations in the Alps, like they're planning for the change in holidays in the Alps. There's going to be far less snow, and they've calculated that pretty much starting by 2030, 1 in 6 winters, only 1 every 6 winters will have enough snow for ski activities. So they're totally rethinking what alpine holidays look like. It's all about hiking and that kind of stuff. Europe is actually the region of the world that is the most affected by climate. Maybe it's poetic justice because the Industrial Revolution started here. I don't know. But there are a lot of European capitals and major cities on the coast that will be underwater, very likely, in like 30, 40 years. I don't know when, but that benchmark of keeping the change under 1 degree Celsius, that's already not going to be the limit. It's going to hit 1.5 and potentially 2. But and I think this creates this feeling of despair of that, like, well, we're already screwed, screw it, and we can't have that attitude. We have to be like, okay, this is the reality, and like we have to do what we can to stop it from being worse, so anyway, I'm going to ask my actual question, which is, and this is to both of you, whoever wants to answer first, and the other one. Can you guys share some examples of how innovation in sustainability is not only reducing environmental impact, but also driving profitability of companies? Because let's be honest, when money is a factor, when money is there, you're more likely to have a reaction.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. And actually, this is interesting because I can loop it back to Bara, what you were asking about things that have changed in the last 15 or so years that I've been working in this space. And I think one of the things that became very clear when we first started really doing mass communication around these issues in 2006, 2007, 2008 was people were really leaning into that despair narrative that you mentioned, Eric. It was very much, we have to do this because the polar bears are dying, because sea levels are rising, because the world is going to be terrible. And what became very clear was that people really shut down when that's the narrative, right? When the narrative is everything is terrible, it does not encourage people to feel optimistic and then take action to tackle these issues. And so I think what's been really amazing is the way that we think about the climate crisis now as, yes, it's a crisis. Yes, it has challenges. Yes, terrible things happen. And also it presents an amazing moment and opportunity for positive change. And so actually, Eric, you talking about Europe is, one of the things that I think really, really has been part of that is, we look to, now we use certain places all across the world, but I'm thinking of a couple, Copenhagen in Denmark is one that's often held up as, if you improve sustainability, if you use these opportunities that are presented, you can really improve people's quality of life, right? People can bike to work. We can have more local green spaces. People can grow gardens that, grow their own food that connects them back to these really amazing things. And I think what I've seen living here in the Bay Area and, close to Silicon Valley and in this kind of hub of innovation and tech entrepreneurship, is really taking that narrative and saying, okay, what are the large scale solutions that we can have that will avert the climate crisis, but also make life better for people? So, how can we invest in renewable energy? How, in a way that, creates fields of windmills versus, huge oil refineries? How can we really look to, climate tech solutions that enable people to manage their, I'm thinking a lot about energy right now, but, manage their home electricity bills better and more efficiently and reduce the risk of blackouts or wildfires, which is something that we tackle a lot here in the United States. How can people spend less time sat in their car in traffic on the freeway and instead use smart public transport? And so I think we really have to, as people who are advocates for this transition, which is a big role that I see in my work, I think that's really the narrative that I want people to kind of lean into when they think about innovation, is that question of, how can this innovation make life better for all of us? I'm going to stop and then see what I want to hear what Anne has to say, even though I know I only half answered your question, Eric.
That's all right. Take it away, Anne.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would, focus on a couple things. So I think in my world, we do talk a lot about not having the right data, and then, Kat had a really, example that's close to all of us. Like, we just don't even know how much energy that we're using. There's these like EPC ratings of energy efficiency of your buildings, but actually a lot of them are guesswork. So I think collecting data is one big aspect that a lot of the tech companies could be helping with. And I think in general, just like digitalization of a lot of our processes, that would definitely help with collecting the right data and giving us an understanding of what needs to be done moving forward. And I think from another aspect is that looking a bit closer at the sustainable finance world, I think the finance world has come up, different types of products. So they are trying to link, to promote sustainability, kind of performance or behavior with your interest rate, for example. So there are some banks, who link your interest rate to a sustainability rating of some sort. So I think there are definitely ways to get more money and provide more incentive into the innovation that we need. And I think the last point, I don't know if that would be a optimistic or pessimistic point. I heard from, I forgot who it was, but a very large asset management company in the world. They said that, for the energy transition, for us to get to net zero, every year we need to invest about $4.5 trillion every year, kind of until 2050. Right now, we only invest a third of that. And then also 50% of the ways to make that transition, we don't know that yet. So we knew about for 50% of it, with carbon capturing, the solar panels and all maybe hydrogen, all that. But there's still 50% that we don't really know how do we get there. So that does pose quite an exciting place where, a lot of scientists or, business people could definitely get to like figure out what do we actually need to do to make that transition. Yeah, so I'll talk about these.
If I can, I want to ask the room just a question that's kind of okay. So like, we all know that one of the biggest challenges to getting off of like fossil fuels and all that kind of stuff is getting a battery where we can store significant amounts of energy, right? This has been a major hurdle. There have been a couple of like, bright spots. We thought we had a solution, and it's turned out not to be really the case. So there's that whole challenge. But Kat, you mentioned public transport. that makes me think of a lot of like the train systems that, here in France, we have 2 or 3 in Paris metro lines, subway lines that are fully automated, right? About like driverless cars. So, less people need to own a car. It's more about electric vehicles. But there's something that's really scary now, and a really kind of current topic. If you think about AI and like hacking, sabotaging, like how do we protect ourselves when we have the possible risk of, some outside source causing some damage? Like you could call it terrorism, you could call it whatever, but bots or something, without naming any names. But this is a real threat. And how do we deal with this? And how does this present itself as an obstacle or a hurdle in terms of people buying into being more green and sustainable versus just going like old school clunky car, gasoline? Any thoughts, my 2 sustainable experts?
I mean, I would say biking is, old school.
Oh yeah.
So biking definitely. I mean, there wouldn't be that risk of being hacked unless if you're using, Velib, the bike sharing. Then okay, maybe it's linked to a system. I don't have a good answer to that. I think I would just say I think we talk a lot about climate and all that, but I think that just transition is a really important topic that I think more and more people are talking about it. If we're doing this transition, are there going to be some people who are going to be left out? I think we perhaps are unfairly posing some of these standards to emerging markets where for a lot of places, burning coal is still the cheapest and that's the only way they could afford to get energy. So I think there's a lot more conversation to be had on how the rich country who has been polluting for a long time could be helping emerging markets to be making that transition.
I would add, I think that your question, Eric, about what are the risks that technology faces? I mean, those are not unique to the climate transition, right? I think one of the classic examples would be our financial markets, our financial institutions, they all transitioned, online per se, and they use a lot of this technology. So, people save hundreds of thousands of dollars in institutions that conduct primarily a lot of their transactions digitally and on the internet. So I think I feel confident at least that we have the technology across all different industries and areas to counteract some of those threats as they emerge, and that people are working on that in a lot of different ways. And I think when I kind of think about, some of the areas, I guess for me, it really comes down to this idea that we have so many areas that need to be dealt with and tackled. And as Anne said, we're really only 50% of the way there in a lot of the areas that we need to be kind of stepping up. And what I've seen in the last 5 years of being here at UC Berkeley is every time we kind of take a step forward, we see that there's like 8 more steps that need to be taken. And I would say that the question about energy is a really good example, right? It's like initially the conversation was like, okay, how do we bring enough renewable energy online? And that was really the work, and our MBAs who were interested in this were going into these sort of energy production companies who were investing in wind and in solar. Now we're seeing our graduates go and work in companies and startups that are redesigning transmission of electricity, right? That's become a huge new field. It's like, great, we've created this renewable energy, but how do we completely redesign the grid system, the transmission systems that communities and countries need to be able to actually move that energy in a different way? How do we use battery storage to bring that in? And that's, that is a really, I mean, if you're interested in like wicked problems and complicated things that require creative, innovative thinking, there's so much space to dive into that. Similarly, with production and resource management and waste, my colleague always says I need to say resource management and not waste. But if you're looking for a complicated problem to tackle, let's figure out how companies, can reduce waste, can invest in circularity, can bring down plastic waste that's polluting the ocean. There's so many places for people to really dive in on these different issues from different angles.
Yeah, and you gave me the right segue for what I had next. Because I can sense I can sense the momentum and urgency about some of these new roles that have to come? Because I can just imagine that there's going to be some new transportation officers out there looking at talking to road officials, talking to like transportation manufacturers, and even like citizens in order to help them adopt to this new transportation or whatever. And then there are so many of these first principle problems to solve, or the wicked problems that you mentioned. So, what are some of the common concentrations that are available, especially in say ESG or supply chain or renewable energy that we are already aware of, but the new ones as well, where more, the companies are feeling the urgency? Because one thing is like, I think like in 2003, nobody would have heard about a chief AI officer, but now every company would possibly have one, or they call them as a chief AI architect. So, are we like looking at sustainability architects and people who are going to champion this? What sort of roles are coming up?
I'd love to hear what Anne thinks of this.
Well, maybe I'll say something before I answer that. I think, already 15 years ago, I was speaking to somebody who's already been in this field for a while. And then she advised me not to work in a internal CSR role, like a corporate social responsibility role, because she was hopeful that the CSR role won't be needed in 10, 15 years, because all kind of sustainability aspects, either it's circularity, waste management, minimize waste, all that aspect will be integrated into every function. But fast forward 15 years later, we still see this role that exists. But I think the good thing is that we do see this role now sometimes, get to be at the executive committee level. They are much higher in level, or sometimes they report directly to the CEO. So going back to your question, I would say you do see some, traditional, let's say, functions that they would add sustainability on top of it. So, it could be like sustainable procurement. I mean, you already mentioned about supply chain. It could be on sustainability from like an impact point of view. So, from the business philanthropy point of view, but, including the sustainability impact lens also. But I think in general, if you do want to be that kind of chief sustainability officer, it is quite a general, let's say, management type of role, which that's why I think MBA students or MBA grads are really well positioned to be in these positions, because in the end you are, I would say sustainability, it's probably one of the most, like, let's say, comprehensive role in a company, because you do have to deal with HR, you do deal with finance, you do with operations, the supply chain, it goes on and on. So it really has to be somebody who has a really good general understanding of how a company works, and could work with, various stakeholders internally and externally. I feel like I didn't really answer your question, but
totally, I see what you're saying. I mean, like, it's no longer a fringe part of a company anymore. It's all the way up to the top, and good things. So, and to your point about, MBA grads are really well positioned for such a role, because they have such a good handle on pretty much every aspect of running a company, whether you're talking about a small startup or a massive multinational. So I think it is an opportunity. It will only be more and more opportunities, despite the advice you were given, was it 15 years ago? There'll be just more and more roles, because there's more and more hands that are in the sustainable aspect of each business, whether it's about innovation or about compliance. So I think it will continue to be a growing opportunity. Good news for Kat.
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely agree with what Anne said. I think there is so many different roles, and that's what I tell a lot of the MBA students that come here to Haas and to UC Berkeley, is that there's kind of several opportunities, right? You could really choose a particular topic area and go really deep, you know, and really become a specialist. Maybe you start up and, you know, you launch a new startup that's tackling a really kind of specific agricultural or food-based product issue around sustainable protein, you know, that we see students who have a very, very specific idea of what they want to do, all the way through to, as Anne said, you know, this sort of more chief sustainability officer role that is very broad, very management heavy, very working across different departments and different disciplines. And so there really is no one way to have a sustainability career, I would say, as part of this transition. What I do see, and what I think is an interesting challenge sometimes for students and for MBAs is, as Anne mentioned, the career trajectory, because it is such an evolving field, can be quite unpredictable, right? I mean, I had a student who just joined our new dual degree, which is an MBA and a Master's of Climate Solutions that we launched this year at UC Berkeley. And they said to me, you know, what do you think, what are the careers you want us to do when we go out into the business world in 2.5 years? And I said, I want the world to be changing so quickly that I can't even predict exactly the roles you're going to be doing 5 years from now, right? I want there to be roles in 5 to 6 years that, like, across companies, across areas, across functions that, like, we can barely conceive of today, because that's the scale of the transition that we need. But what then you need as an MBA student is you need to be able to handle some uncertainty in your career trajectory, right? You need to be able to perhaps engage in just-in-time hiring to get that role at the, you know, place or space that you're really excited about, versus maybe having a higher level of certainty that perhaps a more traditional career MBA post MBA career path can offer you. You have to sort of be ready to say, like, you know, as Anne mentioned, what I'm going to be doing in 4 years might be something that I, you know, didn't really expect or can't really imagine. And so I think that's one of our roles in MBA programs, is to really provide students with the resources and the networks and the support to make it easier for them to kind of take on that journey, essentially, to move into these careers. And that's been something we've been thinking about a lot here at UC Berkeley Haas, is like how to make that more tenable for more students who want to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, what you were speaking about, you know, hoping for a world where the rate of change is so fast, right? That, like, you can't see 5 years down the road. You know, it speaks to agility and, like, adaptability, which I think are two of the most essential skills for an MBA applicant and graduate. Showing that you know how to adapt in an ever-changing landscape of various situations. I mean, this is a very important skill as a business leader, as any kind of leader, right? So, yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, Anne, going a little bit deeper. What specific skills do you believe are essential for MBA graduates entering sustainability roles, and how important is it for them to understand concepts like carbon counting or life cycle assessments?
I do think that reflects on what type of role you want to focus on. So yeah, like Kat was mentioning, you know, you could be a specialist in, let's say, a company who's dealing, you know, who's, you know, trying to solve the carbon accounting aspect. And but I think what I say to a lot of people who, like, you know, who reach out to me and say, like, oh, should I, like, do a master's, or should I do this and that, or, you know, start from, like, a much more junior position because, you know, I'm lacking certain skills, or, like, a particular skills. I usually suggest them to look at what they've done before and kind of leverage on that. So, you know, the carbon aspect, look, I think, I hope there are enough, let's say, scientists or, you know, people coming from scientific backgrounds are working on that. But as an MBA students, perhaps your skill set and then your, you know, experience would be more about, let's say, managing a certain team. Of course, you'll need to have, you know, some basic understanding of those, or you could be working with the team to package a solution that is that you go pitch to clients, right? So it's not necessarily you need to get into the nitty-gritty yourself, But of course, if you love this topic and you want to learn more, of course, go for it. But I think for reflecting what we're saying, I think there's so many different ways that you could go about with it. You could be joining a company that let's say their mission or their product or service is very sustainability focused, or you could join a normal company where there's a procurement aspect. They want to focus on the sustainability aspect, and then join the sustainability team working on internal corporate social responsibility projects, or a part of the philanthropy arm of that corporation, or even join the government or a lot of these national type of organizations. They definitely need people with a lot of management skills too.
Absolutely. Unless Kat has something to add to that, Thomas again has made a comment with respect to renewable energy. There's a whole new vast field for legal professionals given the complex and fragmented legislation landscape. For example, in the European Union, sustainability ripples pretty much across all disciplines.
So I've got a question for you, Kat, and looking at Berkeley Haas and looking at your center, how do you work together with the center, with curriculum, with career services? How does it all come together? Because it sounds like the ideal that Anne was talking about before, where like everyone would have a little bit of responsibility, so it made one particular officer obsolete. Like you have the center there because it's not completely integrated, right? Like that's kind of what I would imagine your role is. But can you talk a little bit about what's happening between these different parts?
Absolutely. And actually, I'm gonna actually correct a little bit, Bara, what you just said, because I think the really unique thing is that my role is not in a center. And so for people who are not familiar with the sort of university and MBA system, often universities, particularly like at the University of California, Berkeley, have centers that are sort of in different academic departments that are really focused on kind of particular issues that are often led by faculty. And that is historically, how we had a lot of the sustainability focused activities here at UC Berkeley Haas. We had a Center for Responsible Business. We have an Energy Institute. We had a Center for Sustainable and Impact Finance. But what is really unique that we have is the Office of Sustainability, which is what I'm part of, actually sits in the Dean's Suite now. So it's really moved from, ironically, centers, which were on the periphery of the university ecosystem. And what our previous dean, Dean Ann Harrison, did was she said, I really want this to be a key strategic priority for the business school, and I am going to create an entity that sits in my office that is connected to all of these different departments. And so it mirrors a little bit what Anne was saying earlier about how, now we're seeing these chief sustainability officer roles no longer being, the CSR department in the basement, but actually being roles at the C-suite level. And I think that's what our dean has enabled to happen. She created this office that then really had the support of the school and the leadership to go out and say, okay, how are we integrating sustainability into our career management services? So that was a very big project that I did last year. I partnered with our career management group, who are amazing. And we did a bunch of research into externally, what does the market look like for sustainability roles? And then internally, where are our graduates from the past 3 years of our MBA programs going, in their roles? How long do they stay? What are their salary implications? And we really used that data to kind of redesign how we were supporting students who wanted to go into climate and sustainability roles. Similarly, we've been working very closely with faculty who teach in the core curriculum to really say, how do we integrate concepts of ESG and sustainability into core curriculum courses on operations, marketing, finance? And so I think that, again, by having this role, as we're seeing in many companies, by having it, much more centrally placed and strategically placed, it has enabled that integration across all different areas that we previously were not necessarily seeing at business schools. So it's been a really exciting transition for us, and we're seeing it increasingly mirrored, I would say, at other schools as well, which has been great.
Yeah, to me, it seems like what's happening in the business school is what's supposed to happen in companies as well, right? As companies start focusing on sustainability as being key of everything. I'm just reminded of this story from before. I worked in a factory a long, long time ago. There used to be this quality department, and they would always be the ones always complaining because they really couldn't do much. Because when they get things at their end, it was either like, oh, it passed or it failed, but they really didn't have like the levers to make changes. So I'm going to ask like a question here in terms of what are the specific leadership challenges when it comes to driving these sustainability initiatives? Because it looks like we have to like move huge behemoths in order to take certain decisions that don't immediately impact the bottom line, because some of them are going to be long-term decisions. So example I'm coming from is, can a company say that our packaging is going to be completely plastic free, because it's going to have a huge cost implication. So in such leadership challenges, what do you think that MBA grads should have specifically? So, and Kat, since you were speaking about it, I'm going to ask you first.
Sure. I think that so about 2 years ago, Microsoft and BCG put out a really interesting report on sustainability skills needed for the green transition. And I've referenced it a lot in the last few years because I think it captured some of these topics that you were asking about. And what they really found was that even though technical knowledge is very important, as Anne said, those are things that a lot of different people, scientists, can do. The real leadership skills in the sustainability transition are things like systems thinking. How do you see all the different parts of a company interacting? Change management. How do you guide a group of people through changing, processes like completely changing the packaging that they have, or the processes for acquiring those packaging. These are really specific skills that the MBAs, I think, are well placed to have. Stakeholder engagement was another one that, how do you bring people along on this journey across all different departments in a company? And so I think those are the types of skills that, again, MBAs can really develop during their program and then take into a company to help move the needle in a big way on some of these strategic and leadership questions. If you can convince an entire room of managers who've been running their production in the same way for the last 30, 40, 50 years, if you can say to them, I know that, moving from putting all of our packaging wrapped in, huge amounts of plastic to being delivered like Amazon does now, they deliver all their product in these sort of paper envelopes. Like, if you can be the person that can really convince a large group of people and teams to make that change, you're going to have a very, very big impact, but it's not going to be easy. And so I think that's one of the key skills, that kind of systems thinking, change management, stakeholder engagement skills that MBAs can really develop and can then really have an impact in big companies.
It's great that there's examples of that now, right? Like the example that you're giving of Amazon really can make an impact on other companies too, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you get someone like Amazon to do it, and then all of a sudden it becomes mainstreamed.
Yeah, and I think there's pros and cons to all of these big companies and their actions. But we had the Chief Sustainability Officer, Cara Hurst of Amazon, here at Haas in the spring speaking, and she talked about how they wanted to make their delivery vans. There's a lot of criticism about the emissions from all these Amazon delivery vans, and so they wanted to switch to electric delivery vans. But they were told, well, there is no one making electric delivery vans. So she worked with, the delivery team, the global delivery team for Amazon. And she said, okay, let's put in an order of 100,000 electric delivery vans and just create a market for this overnight. And so a large company like that, when it makes a decision to invest, Amazon created the market for electric delivery vans. which other companies can now use and access. So I think that's a really interesting and exciting example of how change can actually happen quite quickly if a big player makes a move.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just kind of say the same thing along the same lines. Like, it is challenging. So I think, resilience and then hustling, like you have to go back and repeat the same thing, maybe say in different ways, bring in new research. Yeah, so like influence, like leadership through influence, that's definitely a very important aspect. And I think, yeah, having sort of empathy, like understanding what are their pain points, like what do they care. One example was that I was speaking to a PE company where they have a chief sustainability officer. So they're talking to their portfolio companies, and one of these portfolio companies, kind of typical Texan, kind of like redneck type of company, they're like, ESG, I don't really care. But then, when he went in and just, tried to understand a little bit how the company functions, and he realized that their turnover rate of these employees is like 95% every year. So they say, well, I mean, this is what I'm going to focus on. It's, it is very much sustainability related. It's like, taking care of taking care of your employees, making sure you retain talent. But it is so essential to the profitability of the company too. So you're definitely going to have points within the company. It will be improving efficiency also. So there definitely are ways that you could look at the business model and then pick a point where you could work on, and then you can only do that by understanding what some points that people care about, like the different stakeholders, what they really care about, and help them solving their problems. In that way, you can definitely have a lot more allies along your side.
I think that segues into what I'm curious about is how the regulations, the international regulations and shifting investor expectations around ESG are actually influencing companies as well. Right?
So I think in Europe, that's definitely where the European Union is definitely on the forefront on this. We do see let's say the market like adapting, but also having some trouble adapting to it because the regulation it comes really quick and really hard, and a lot of heavy lifting, and there's also a big question on enforcement. So especially European Union, all these EU level laws needs to be implemented at individual countries, and then the countries will adapt them into their national laws, and then there will be the one who's enforcing it. But you probably have various ways of enforcing, or levels of enforcement in different countries. So we also see a bit of that when I'm talking to some clients where they're kind of thinking ahead. There are some clients who are saying like, well, actually, I'm just going to wait and see, if there's like a huge litigation case coming up among my peers, and then I will, figure out what I need to do to comply. But I do think regulation is a good thing. Yeah, you definitely moving a much larger group of players in the market to be, playing at the same level, and yeah, so I do think perhaps like a bit cynical. I think if you think that all companies are gonna do good or do it for the sake of their external stakeholders, I don't think that's always true for all the companies. So I do think we need a bit of the regulatory control coming in.
Definitely. I mean, in general, companies don't move until they're forced to, right? If it affects profits. So we need both. I think, I don't know what you guys think in terms of like who is a bigger driver of innovation in the sustainability space, public or private. But I think we need, but Private companies tend to have more bankrolls, be more nimble, can be more reactive or proactive. Governments famously can be cumbersome, slow, sluggish, and so on. But you need them to hold companies accountable. So.
Yeah, we do see, I think, different types of player, playing that different role, right? So you do have these new solutions that's never been tested. So for a lot of big companies, it's just like too risky for them to invest. So they might, rely on, the smaller startups, whatnot, to be doing that. But we also see that the government, so there are some like development banks are doing really interesting things. So because they're kind of, not exactly within government, but not exactly private either, they have a really strong mandate, let's say, from the government or, the organization they belong to. And then they could do really innovative things. But we definitely talk a lot about private public partnerships in a lot of these cases. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how, maybe the next big technology breakthrough, it would be from one of these public funding, let's say development banks, or a public funding fund that's coming out.
Yeah, and I would also just add that government has a lot of tools that they can use to incentivize changes in business behavior, right? And so we want, as a sustainability advocate, I want the government to be leveraging those tools, whether it's disclosure enforcements that force, existing companies to change best practices, whether it's things like the Investment Reduction Act that passed here in the United States and really kind of transformed the market for energy systems in the United States and really moved the needle for a lot of companies to really scale up their work in the coming years. So again, kind of going back to what you were asking about, what can people do? I think really seeing government and politics and voting as a lever to also encourage company behavior is something that I really support. Even at the state level, right? We see here in California that things that started in California are now being used, across the nation, across the world, the cap and trade system that was developed here. And so engaging at the state level and at the national level in political issues you don't need to think that government's going to solve the problem, but recognize that government can really play a role and pull some levers that can make some changes.
I mean, the challenge there with the government is that the very subject of climate change and sustainability has been politicized, and there's massive campaigns, like smear campaigns. This doesn't exist. It's not real, or if it does, it's not, humankind's fault. Whatever the case, we need to deal with it here.
Yeah, so we're almost at the top of the hour. So this is a topic that's so important. And what I heard from Kat and Anne today was that if you have 4 Ps, you can have a very good career in sustainability, which is like if you are persistent, if you have the passion for it, and then if you can be persuasive, then you can be a pioneer who gets to save the world. So there are definitely lots of opportunities, and definitely MBAs are better suited for it. I want to thank our featured guest today, Kat and Anne. Thanks so much for the insightful conversation. And if you liked today's episode, please give us a little thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to us and subscribe to MBAwaves.com and our YouTube channel to stay on top of all the latest trends and news in the world of MBAs. Please don't forget to check us out next week, same time, same place. Till then, bye, everybody.
And if you're American, register to vote.
Yeah. Thank
Change
you.
starts here.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
It's taking a long time to end.